Greeks and Turks have much more in common than it might seem. Football fan riots, traditional dishes with different names, and a peculiar way of preparing coffee that Greeks call Greek coffee and Turks call Turkish coffee. Just as easily as a friendly atmosphere can be created between them, a fight can break out when they disagree on the name of a city. Turks are good at many things, such as making TV dramas, performing hair transplants, and going viral on TikTok. But when the Ottoman Empire still existed, they were mainly good at killing, enslaving, and committing a few war crimes. In today's video, you'll learn about some of the atrocities committed by the Ottoman Empire during the conquest of Constantinople, now Istanbul. If you're Greek, don't curse at me. The whole world calls the city that. Before Mehmed II fired a single cannonball, he was already winning the war inside defenders' heads. The 21-year-old Sultan understood something timeless. Fear is cheaper than gunpowder and more effective than starvation. Picture the scene. You're standing on Constantinople's ancient walls, looking out at what can only be described as medieval hell. The Ottoman camp stretches beyond the horizon. 80,000 soldiers who've been chanting Allahu Akbar non-stop for weeks. It's like the world's most terrifying religious festival, except the main event is your death. Then, there's Orban's cannon. This Hungarian engineer had originally offered his services to the Byzantines, but when they couldn't pay his asking price, he switched sides faster than a politician during election season. His bronze monster measured 27 feet long and fired stone balls weighing up to 1,200 pounds. The sound could be heard 15 miles away. Imagine the world's angriest thunderstorm having a tantrum. The Ottomans test-fired this beast in full view of the city walls. Subtle, right? It was like bringing a tank to a knife fight and honking the horn just to be sure everyone noticed. But Mehmed's psychological game was more sophisticated than just big cannon go boom. When Byzantine ships tried to break the naval blockade, captured sailors were impaled within sight of the city walls. Families had to watch their sons die slowly over days, knowing this was just a preview of coming attractions. The most diabolic touch? The Ottomans made sure defenders could smell their cooking. Nothing says, "surrender now," like the aroma of well-fed enemy soldiers enjoying dinner while you're rationing leather soup. By the time the final assault began, half the psychological battle was already won. The defenders weren't just fighting an army. They were fighting the certainty of their own doom. May 29, 1453, started at 5 a.m. with the sound of Ottoman cannons finally breaching the Theodosian walls. What followed was 18 hours of violence so organized it would make modern corporate efficiency experts weep with envy, if they weren't too busy throwing up. The Ottomans had turned conquest into a 3-act play, each wave designed for maximum psychological impact. Act 1. Eliminate the professionals. The first wave targeted Constantinople's 7,000 defenders. Emperor Constantine died fighting alongside his soldiers, the last Roman emperor going out like a proper warrior. But here's where the story gets murky. While Ottoman sources claim they mounted his head on a spear, historians are skeptical. The truth is, nobody really knows what happened to Constantine's body. In the chaos of battle, the last emperor of Byzantium simply disappeared. The methodical execution of Byzantine soldiers was designed to send a message: resistance equals death, and surrender won't be accepted. It's the kind of binary choice that makes game shows look complicated. Act 2. The human sorting algorithm. Around 8 a.m., the Ottomans began what can only be described as the world's most horrific job interview process. They divided Constantinople's roughly 45,000 remaining inhabitants into categories: young women and children for the slave markets, adult men for forced labor or immediate execution, and elderly people who were killed on sight for being economically inefficient. Families were torn apart with the precision of a bureaucratic procedure. Children as young as 8 were branded with hot irons to indicate their new ownership. It was systematic dehumanization on an industrial scale, centuries before the Industrial Age. Act 3. Sacred space, profane acts. The final act took place in the Hagia Sophia, where 3,000 civilians had sought sanctuary. Islamic law traditionally protected people in religious buildings, but Mehmed had conveniently suspended those rules for this occasion. Ottoman cavalry rode directly into Christianity's greatest cathedral. They performed the first Islamic prayer service over the blood of Christian civilians, a conversion ceremony that would make modern public relations disasters look like minor inconveniences. By evening, Constantinople had been transformed from a living city into a showcase of Ottoman efficiency. The conquest wasn't just military, it was a masterclass in systematic cultural annihilation. The Ottomans didn't invent cruelty, but they turned it into performance art. Their methods were designed for maximum psychological impact, both on victims and witnesses. Think of it as medieval shock therapy, except the only thing getting cured was your will to resist. Impalement was the Ottoman equivalent of a business card, memorable, distinctive, and guaranteed to leave an impression. Skilled executioners could keep victims alive for 2 to 3 days while impaled, avoiding vital organs with the precision of a surgeon who'd taken a very dark oath. The Ottomans positioned these executions in public spaces, creating forests of dying people that served as permanent billboards for their message, "This could be you." They even had a class system for impalement. Byzantine nobles got golden stakes as a mark of their former status. Nothing says, "We respect your heritage," like premium execution equipment. In Constantinople, the devshirme system reached peak efficiency. This practice involved recruiting Christian boys aged 18 for forced conversion and military service. Recruiting here means kidnapping, but with paperwork. Parents were forced to watch their sons being evaluated like livestock, knowing that selection meant permanent separation and forced conversion. The chosen boys faced complete identity erasure. New Islamic names, forbidden native languages, and mandatory participation in destroying Christian symbols. Many were castrated for imperial harem service, a procedure with a 90% mortality rate. The survivors became janissaries, elite soldiers destined to spend their lives conquering other Christian lands. It was the ultimate long-term investment strategy. Today's victim becomes tomorrow's weapon. The Ottomans weaponized sexual violence with the efficiency of a government program. Soldiers received 3 days to do whatever they wanted with captured women. Official reward time for holy war participation. It combined entertainment, humiliation of the conquered elite, and the production of mixed-race children who would belong to neither culture. The most psychologically devastating technique was forcing children to participate in destroying their own heritage. Christian kids were made to spit on icons, trample crosses, and recite Islamic prayers while their parents watched. It was family trauma with a religious studies curriculum. The conquest of Constantinople was one of the most thoroughly documented bloodbaths in medieval history. Unlike many historical atrocities that rely on later accounts, this one had front-row witnesses from all sides taking notes. You don't learn this in history classes out there. The chronicler Dukas provided what amounts to a medieval war crimes report. His description of the Hagia Sophia massacre pulls no punches. The blood of the innocent flowed like water, and the screams of women and children echoed for 3 days. He counted 400 children killed inside the cathedral alone, a number that hits differently when you remember this was Christianity's most sacred space. Leonikos Chalkokondylos took a more analytical approach, documenting casualties with the precision of a modern statistician. His numbers are more conservative than the sensationalized accounts. Thousands dead, thousands more enslaved. What makes his account chilling is the matter-of-fact tone, horror delivered with the emotional range of a grocery list. Ottoman chroniclers saw the same events but framed them completely differently. Tursun Beg, the official chronicler, justified the massacres as religious duty. The purification of Christian lands requires the elimination of Christian corruption. He wrote about mass murder the way other people write about spring cleaning, necessary, beneficial, and slightly tedious. Ashik Pashazad provided the operational details that reveal just how organized this conquest was. Different military units had specific assignments. The Janissaries took the walls, the Sipahis took the people, and the Akinchis took the wealth. It was conquest by division of labor. Henry Ford would have been proud. Venetian merchant Niccolo Barbaro captured European shock perfectly. They kill in the name of God with the same enthusiasm Christians show in prayer. For Europeans accustomed to medieval warfare's brutal but limited scope, the religious conviction driving Ottoman violence was genuinely bewildering. The most psychologically complex accounts come from Greeks who served Mehmet after the conquest. Critoboulos tried to rationalize what he'd witnessed. The Sultan showed mercy by ending their suffering quickly. It's the historical equivalent of Stockholm Syndrome, but with better documentation. The cruelty at Constantinople wasn't random medieval brutality. It was the product of 3 powerful forces combining like ingredients in a recipe for historical disaster. The concept of jihad provided a theological hall pass for unlimited violence. Ottoman soldiers genuinely believed they were conducting holy war that guaranteed paradise regardless of earthly actions. When you're convinced your victims are enemies of God, mercy becomes blasphemy. It's like having a divine permission slip for atrocities. The Ghazi tradition celebrated warriors who conquered Christian lands for Islam. Mehmed positioned himself as the ultimate Ghazi, the guy who would finally take the city that had resisted Islamic conquest for 8 centuries. Success here meant legendary status in the Islamic world, while failure meant disgrace. The brutality served as a massive advertisement to Christian Europe. Surrender immediately, or this happens to you. The psychological impact paralyzed European resistance for decades. Why fight when you've seen the preview of what losing looks like? The Ottoman Empire ran on slaves, and Constantinople represented a massive harvest of human resources. The careful categorization of prisoners by age, gender, and skill reveals how thoroughly they'd industrialized human trafficking. It wasn't emotional violence. It was economic planning. The Devshirme system alone provided thousands of slaves who would fuel Ottoman expansion for generations. These weren't just victims. They were long-term investments that would return dividends in the form of janissary soldiers and administrative personnel. What made Ottoman cruelty so effective was the intersection of these 3 factors. Religious fanaticism provided moral justification, political calculation provided strategic direction, and economic incentives provided practical motivation. Compare this to other medieval conquests. The Mongol destruction of Baghdad was more deadly but lacked religious motivation. The Crusader massacre of Jerusalem had religious fervor but lacked Ottoman organizational efficiency. The combination of faith, strategy, and profit created a cruelty machine that was genuinely unprecedented in its scope and effectiveness. The conquest of Constantinople became the template for future Ottoman expansion, proof that combining religious conviction with bureaucratic efficiency could achieve the impossible. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves across Europe that lasted longer than most boy bands' careers. This wasn't just another city changing hands. It was the end of an empire that had lasted longer than most civilizations managed to exist. The papal court declared that the gates of hell have opened in the east, which, granted, was their reaction to most things, but this time, they had a point. Italian city-states began massive fortification projects, assuming Ottoman invasion was inevitable. Some European leaders seriously considered abandoning Christianity entirely rather than face similar destruction. Talk about effective psychological warfare. The conquest fundamentally altered European military thinking. The effectiveness of Ottoman artillery against Constantinople's ancient walls forced the complete rethinking of defensive architecture. Medieval fortress design became as obsolete as flip phones. The systematic nature of Ottoman cruelty also influenced European military doctrine. Many armies adopted similar terror tactics to compete. It was an arms race, but for psychological warfare. The transformation of Constantinople into Istanbul represented one of history's most efficient cultural makeovers. Within a generation, virtually all traces of Byzantine civilization had been eliminated from the city. Churches became mosques, Greek names became Turkish ones, and the Christian population was either killed, enslaved, or forced to convert. The speed was genuinely impressive, if you're into that sort of thing. It took the Ottomans less time to erase 1,000 years of Byzantine culture than it takes most people to renovate a bathroom. The systematic cruelty of the conquest became embedded in European cultural memory for centuries. The image of the terrible Turk that dominated European imagination was based largely on the documented brutalities of 1453. This cultural trauma influenced everything from literature to military planning. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, Mehmed's success elevated him to legendary status. Taking the city that had resisted Islamic conquest for 8 centuries made him the ultimate Ghazi. The systematic cruelty was celebrated as proof of divine favor. Different audience, different interpretation. The destruction of Byzantine manuscripts represented an irreplaceable loss to human civilization. Thousands of ancient texts were burned, including works by classical authors that existed nowhere else. The Ottomans didn't just conquer a city, they deleted centuries of accumulated knowledge. It was like losing Wikipedia, but forever. Today, the conquest is celebrated as a great military victory, while the systematic cruelty is conveniently minimized. It's selective historical memory at its finest, keeping the glory, forgetting the gore. The conquest of Constantinople reveals uncomfortable truths about how civilizations fall and how ordinary people become participants in extraordinary cruelty. The religious justifications, Political motivations and economic incentives that drove Ottoman brutality in 1453 continue to appear in conflicts around the world today. Most